Good afternoon. Welcome back to La La Land. How handy is that I found that? Because that's the best way to describe this. I've done about 1.5 minutes of preparation for this. So take it with a grain of salt. But I'm going to try and follow the logic of our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. So he is now he's jumping on a bandwagon. He's condemning the actions that are all there's yet to be any charges. It is mostly just hearsay in a technological environment where we're at the cusp of out of control hearsay and nothing ever being able to be confirmed or denied. And our Prime Minister has gone all in with all these little casino chips to use this moment to call for the public execution of a prince, which is to be expected because he's an absolute Republican, communist, socialist grub. But I can't help but continuously see the hypocrisy of this whole thing. The only online influencer person that Anthony Albanese allowed to interview him before the last election was Abby Chatfield. Now, Abby Chatfield screams from the rooftops in support and says, quote, "I love abortions." Screams to the rooftops in support of online platforms such as OnlyFans that have simply changed the modality of the antisocial, I guess, is what we traditionally would have called it, the antisocial, uncivilized activity. So where are we going to land here in this? We cannot talk about all of these things unless we all agree on somewhere to stand. And I am having trouble, you know what I mean? I'm having trouble finding, it's like if we, let's for a conservative figure, let's say that, let's do an 80-20. Let's say 80% of the potential yet to be proven, yet to be determined Epstein global sex empire. Let's say 80% of those professionals were of age. And let's say 20% of them were underage. And let's it could be worse than that. I don't know. I don't have any figures at hand. Okay, so immediately we're down to hearsay and speculation about 20% of a supposed yet to be proven, undetermined. Yet it's yet to be seen whether we will even ever be able to prove this, in this specific Epstein, Duke, Royal Prince Andrew paradigm, right? Let's assume, to be conservative, that 20% of those women were underage. So we're only concerned about 20% of a elite, like premium, highest level sexual distribution service, in which I can only assume, based on the money that was floating around, that if we take the 100%, I'm not condoning the 20. If we follow the feminist logic, this 80% are the highest level remunerated sexual professional workers in the world. The 20%, they're underage, and that's a crime. The 80% would have been aware of the 20%. You know what I mean? The 80% has never been declared as having any responsibility to preventing the 20% from occurring. This is before we've even discussed anything to do with a man. Although I assume that in a parallel, exactly as disturbing fucking world, and again, this is all assumption, this isn't something I have any personal experience in, I assume that there is a significant, appropriately counter, or not count, like adjacent male marketplace going on as well. But so, we'll just supply that, in which the same as the 80% would have the closest responsibility, considering they are the highest remunerated professionals now in a now legitimized feminist society in which all of these things have been legitimized. Of course, not the 20% that were underage, but the 80%. And so I just can't see how the responsibility is not falling on the 80% of the highest. It's like if this was NBA basketball players, okay, and we found out there was some horrific fucking crime going on the periphery within the basketball world, it would only ever land in the 80% of the most highly paid sportsmen in the world would be responsible for, say, horrific things that were going on to a unseen, illegal 20% potential. You know what I mean? So I can't see. It's like this is turning into an exposure of this underlying treasonous attitude towards our highest head of state and the entire structure that it's there. And it is completely avoiding, and it is cherry picking out information and leading the entire world on a witch hunt, rather than an accurate investigation, rather than an attempt to end the behavior. Now, this 80-20 that I'm speaking about here is only existing in the Epstein potential, yet to be proven, theoretical global sex trafficking network. And my argument would be that the 20%, this 20% illegal, that was their business card. That was their business card. That was their blue coloring in their fucking, Breaking Bad crystal meth. You know what I mean? There's, because the 80%, they're everywhere. They're everywhere and now in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 new ways. You know what I mean? That make even the most sophisticated, the most, technically large and powerful, sexual distribution service, as this Epstein fella seems to have been, he's a drop in the ocean of the global sex trade, which I assume has the exact same Pareto distribution as his potentially did, just at a monstrous scale. Now, in order for these services, whether they be digital or whether they be, flying around in private jets, to attain this 20%, a normalization of the 80% must occur. There will always be a top of the market and there will always be a bottom of the market. It doesn't matter how many Epsteins you take out, somebody will always enter the vacuum that they have left. And the more that you promote and encourage, and this includes all the down the line procedures, this includes abortions, an absolutely vital healthcare for this now legitimized profession, in which 80% of those people, according to the only influencer that Anthony Albanese allowed himself to be interviewed with, the 80% of these professional workers, it is misogynistic to claim that they are anything other than, hardworking professional entrepreneurs. Yet they are building the infrastructure. A rising tide lifts all ships. So if there is outrage towards any level of this 20% occurring, surely we should prevent the global flood, the global lifting of the global tide to do with sexual, business, sexual entrepreneurship, sexual distribution services. We can apply this like there in Australia. There is no legal distribution of illicit drugs. Okay? There is none. There is an attempt to legitimize certain illicit drugs, like let's just say the most obvious, marijuana, being legitimized. And actually it does. It exists right now. We have a parallel universe going on in which we have legitimized medical distribution of marijuana and then illegal illicit distribution of marijuana. It's the exact same structural unit that the prostitution sex industry, sex workers were in. They were in this exact predicament. Now, it is illegal for me to normalize the illegal sale of drugs, and you know what I mean, and to use children to distribute those drugs. Incredibly illegal. If I'm in a there's no doubt in my mind that if I am caught distributing illegal illicit drugs, you know what I mean, by the police or investigators, and there is a aspect of my underworld business that is both recruiting, normalizing, indoctrinating underage people to do the dirty work for that, which is going on, that will go to the top of the list on the prosecutions, and then it will be the most chewy morsel for the media to chew on. They were using children to distribute their drugs. You can imagine it. You can imagine the headlines. Yet this cohort of online digital sex workers, masterminded by a Ukrainian entrepreneurial thing, in the middle of a fucking war, have lifted that tide so high that I assume that 20%, perhaps in the 80s or the 90s, whenever Epstein was flying around the world and at the height of his ungodly fucking enterprise, I can only assume that 20% figure is consistent, but the amount of people, the amount of children, you know what I mean, must be at this stage astronomical, and is that. And it appears that our Prime Minister is stuck. He has wandered down a feminist alleyway. You know what I mean? He's been followed down that feminist alleyway in a almost like drunken, drug-induced stupor. He's just talking to himself, thinking that when he hits, eventually he's going to walk out the other side of that alleyway, but it is a dead end. And he has been followed down that alleyway by the worst, most horrific organized criminal activities, globally now. And he has nowhere to go. And he's spending his last moments before he is pummeled to a pulp in condemning one single individual at the highest level of this, ridiculously disgusting fucking industry, because he happens to be a member of the royal family that our supposed Prime Minister is a loyal representative of. Now, that logic, if applied to, it's like, well, if treasonous, illegal occupation, violence, organized coup, if that follows the same Pareto distribution of this 80-20, you know what I mean? And how easily now, you used to say one thing about the king and you'd have your head chopped off. And it's like, I'm not saying to go back to that, but it's like now, It's not just been normalized, very much like this global sexual trade, normalized by devices that we hold in our hand. Right up to the point of absolute absurdity, where he's literally taking this moment and then it becomes clear. It's like the only question becomes this. Oh, look, Anthony, you are such a brilliant investigative, detective. Look at how wonderfully you've exposed this naughty, naughty prince, from 10, 15, 20 years ago. Look how wonderfully you have exposed. They should make you king. Even better, they should make you supreme Oriental emperor of Eurasia. And my only question to you, if I had the opportunity that Abby Chatfield has, I do not sell enough butt plugs to get my argument over the line. Okay? It wasn't aligned. I decided to attempt to sell, full-size mirrors to encourage people to move and to, remove themselves from the handheld hypnotism device. Restore their movement and meet themselves at full scale, and then perhaps be able to meet others at full scale as well. But butt plugs, just they're like Sarah Jessica Parker selling me the rabbit fucking dildo vibrator all those years ago when I was underage. The butt plugs they just move. You know what I mean? They move product. They're in all fancy colors. It's an extension of childhood toys, and it just kids love toys. Kids love selling. They even call them toys. They're called toys, sex toys. Yeah, kids have toys. Kids have toys and sex toys, and the majority of those sex toys, or a huge portion of those sex toys, are sold directly into this industrial, sexual distribution fucking empire, which, monkey see, monkey do, literally, can only ever lead to 20% figure. Oh, sorry, this 20% figure are growing to an exponential fucking, an exponential amount. You know what I mean? But that figure is arbitrary. It's like you can't imagine 2 million fucking children being raped. It's like 2 million children being raped, 2,000 children being raped, 200,000 children, 20 million children being raped. You can't really picture that amount of things, okay? It just doesn't work. But you fucking take one photograph of a fucking prince that's been gotten in trouble and he's in the naughty fucking corner, and everybody marches forward. But that's not protection. It's not child protection. It's nothing like that, technically. So it's like, yeah. You've knocked out eighth in line for the throne, Anthony. But what did it cost you? What was the cost? So that a bunch of high-class escorts could have their Me Too moment, and throw a could be, I'll call him a could be, throw a could be king in the slammer for a couple of hours. Well, yeah, that might be a fun party. But at what cost, Anthony? At what cost?